Hello, everybody, and welcome to Business in the Front, Party in the Backup, a webinar overview of Rubrik and NetApp and their joint integration. I want to thank everybody who's able to make it today. Looks like we got a good list of attendees. With that said, this is Matt Brown. I'm going to hand it over to Nathan Balls, who's going to get us started on the Rubrik overview.
All right, sounds good. Although Matt, it looks like I need permission to, there we go. Get us set up to share. Oh, well, hey, I was going to start video so you could see Matt, the rather horrifying wig and headband I'm wearing, and give everybody the full.
Let me get that fixed here.
I figured I should pull in with the theme, and I want to thank
everybody
for joining.
I know. There was a promise made on video.
Yeah. So, and also, Matt, I'll give a second just to let Jonathan and Zach introduce themselves as well for the different sections they'll carry. But while we're waiting on the video there, I just want to, thank everybody for joining. Really appreciate your time today, as well as just introduce myself really quick. I'm Nathan Balls. I'm one of Rubrik's sales engineers here local to Colorado and the Rockies. And I've been with Rubrik almost 2 years now. It was with VMware for a decade prior, and can always engage in some good sysadmin stories for my life prior to that. So, Jonathan and Zach, if you guys can come off of mute. Jonathan, why don't you introduce yourself, and then
Sure.
Zach.
Thanks, Nathan. Hi, my name is Jonathan Leafty. I'm a solutions architect within the data protection division of NetApp. So what that covers is everything native data protection within the NetApp portfolio, but also with our partners like Rubrik. Prior to that, I spent 5 years on the partner side. Among things, I was a Rubrik partner, so I'm familiar with running and implementing a Rubrik environment. And then prior to that, I spent about 8 years in enterprise IT. So I have some of those same stories, Nathan.
Awesome. And
Zach?
Hey guys, I'm Zach Palekia. I'm a channel SC out of the Northeast, so I cover basically partner training for Rubrik. And before that, I came from a reseller myself as a data protection specialist. So I've got experience in kind of all the data protection offerings out there, and I kind of saw Rubrik and wanted to come aboard. So here I am.
Awesome. All right. Well, so I'll start carrying through the opening. We're going to kind of hit an agenda here where we're going to both NetApp and Rubrik are going to have an opportunity to speak a little bit to their technologies at their core. We're going to talk a lot about where we partner and how we can make a better together story. And then Zach is going to help actually show some of that integration in our demo lab. And then all three of us are going to be available for some Q&A. Obviously, we threw out some professional pictures there. But I promise you guys will probably see more on LinkedIn of wigs and headbands.
Hey, Nathan, try your video again.
Try video now?
It may be that it's...
There we go.
There it is. There it is.
Hey, I'm proud of this.
All right, so, Josh, I'll get you... you got to be a co-host. I'm getting this fixed here. Oh, look at that.
All right, excellent. So all that said, if everybody can see the slides and we're good to go. All right. So from a Rubrik perspective, and there was the agenda I spoke to. Just want to give you guys a holler on that. Those are very varying aspects that we're going to cover. So from a Rubrik perspective, we always want to talk a little bit about legacy first, because it's good to know where we came from to understand where we're at. And for those of you who've worked with backup for an extended period of time, you know that it's got a history of being very complex. I mean, you can see all the varying components that might exist there, from the software itself to varying servers and proxies, considering whether or not how to set up replication, dealing with scheduling on an incredibly extensive basis. Eventually things started to modernize a little bit, and we went from tape to backup storage, but there's still always a consideration of offsite archive. And then you're always finding the vendor right for the backup storage to sit behind the software. It was a whole lot of complexity. And it was a legacy system that didn't really have cloud, automation, or security in mind when it was built. So the three things that all of us end up focusing a lot on these days, oftentimes were bypassed by these legacy architectures. So Rubrik really came into the picture here and saw an opportunity to build out and look to ways to simplify the process, but really honestly to simplify all of your lives. You know, backup is an expensive insurance policy. And while we all have to have it by virtue of needing to protect our data, we wanted to, from a Rubrik perspective, find a way to build that better mousetrap, make it that much easier to handle and work for you. And then how do we do more with that baseline that you have to have? So our cloud data management platform, you know, whether on-prem or off, basically you can think of it as a consolidated hyper-converged infrastructure that can handle backup, recovery, DR, and archival, that's built out for cloud automation and security. And we'll touch on all of those different areas here in a second. So not only did we build a platform that iterated on that legacy architecture that carried cloud automation and security in mind, but we also wanted to fit into, you know, that real true automation story. So if we look at the fact that Rubrik is an API first company, so our UI, anything that we might demo or show you, it eats our API under the hood. We were API long before we even had a UI when we first introduced the product. So what you see on screen now are all the pre-built automations that we have out there. The cool thing about Rubrik is it's not a question of if, it's a question of how. Whether that be integrating directly with REST API for our core platform or GraphQL for our Polaris SaaS platform, or using overlay SDKs like PowerShell or Python or Go, or a pre-built. For those of you using, say, ServiceNow as a front end, we have the capability of actually downloading a dashboard and an entire service catalog that's pre-built so that you can do almost all of your Rubrik integration right through a ServiceNow front end. The goal, again, is that Rubrik is providing that platform for you that is secure, that is simple to use, and that fits into your existing automation platforms, however and wherever you need it to do so. So how does it work? For our core platform, you know, it's a very simple process to set up. You can see that there's a lot of different protected workloads that are out there, but the core version is, if you cover it, if you've got it in your environment, it's very likely that we cover it. I mean, all the core aspects from SQL and Oracle, vSphere, Hyper-V, Nutanix, AIX, just NAS workloads in general, Office 365. Setup is simple. Within 30 minutes, we can rack stack, get our appliances booted, and beginning discovering your environment. It's really quick to do installs, especially compared to some of the legacy platforms where you may spend a week or more on the varying pieces of technology. We have an intelligent SLA policy, which we'll go into a little bit more detail here in a moment. But again, the idea is that you set a very simple SLA policy and everything is automated under the hood. There's no more schedules to manage. There's no more specific workload silos to manage. And we can build out that orchestrated recovery for near zero RPOs and RTOs. And we'll talk about the live mount functionality that we have. Live mount allowing you that near instant recovery time objective for VMware, for Hyper-V, for SQL, for Oracle, for Windows volumes. And we look to the fact that we're a cloud mobile platform. We understand that you as a customer are experiencing needs to develop on-prem, to develop off-prem, and to build that true hybrid infrastructure between both of those. So we look to that perspective as we work with our current product and our roadmap for development, particularly looking toward our partnership with NetApp and some of their particular capabilities around StorageGRID and more, but always looking to give you the capability to have near instant recovery with Rubrik and have great flexibility as to how you drive your long-term workload. We also have some capability to have Google-like search for instant and easy access to any breakout files you need to find. So you can literally search across your entire Rubrik infrastructure for a single file, not even having to orient by object first. We can also have the capability of converting your on-prem vSphere VMs and Hyper-V VMs to AMI or VHD in AWS or Azure, and that's an incremental conversion, very quick, and leads to some excellent DR considerations, test dev scenarios, and migrating cloud workloads where need be. And lastly, we've built end-to-end for security. There's end-to-end encryption. We've also, you know, again, in terms of modernizing that legacy infrastructure, we look to the point of doing things like not having permanently presented storage that's part of your Rubrik backend. We make straight RPC calls to the objects that we protect. Those communications are TLS 1.2. It's a zero trust oriented system, so it's always requiring reauthentication. And then, you know, not only end-to-end encryption, but we have native immutability to protect against ransomware. And that's not something that requires post-install configuration. That's day 0 when you power on your Rubrik appliance. Our core file system has no concept of changing data once written. So those original files cannot be changed or altered by ransomware out there trying to crawl your backups. And lastly, we've got additional tools within our Polaris SaaS platform, like our Radar product, that allow for machine language driven ransomware recovery. So you really understand, exactly what was affected, and you can have that scalpel-like recovery approach. So policy driven management, I said we're going to talk about SLA domains and what that looks like from a Rubrik perspective. And the idea is that SLA domains are going to focus on what your applications need, what the business might tell you that they need. So that's going to be a recovery point objective. They might tell you how long or how short for an RTO, or where they need their data to go, or where it needs to be replicated. So Rubrik has designed an SLA policy protection engine where you create an SLA domain that's defined by how often you need backups, how long you need to keep them for, and where you send that data to. And it ends up being a very slick system because, in this example here, you see that backups are kept for, we take them every 12 hours and we keep that for a week. Then we keep dailies for 14 days. We keep monthlies for 6 months and annuals for 3 years. So you can now immediately tell the business what's out there, and you don't have to schedule that under the hood. You don't have to maintain separate schedules if you need backups every 12 hours or every 6 hours or every day. All you do is set the frequency, the retention, how often and for how long. In a moment, we'll talk about where to. And then Rubrik takes care of the load balancing, the scheduling, everything else under the hood. We're giving you that time back as a backup administrator so you can focus on more high value tasks. Additionally, we're a first full incremental forever system. So if a backup is missed, there's not a concept of then having to go take another full or redo the fulls on the weekend. Rubrik under the hood manages the entire backup chain to make sure that we only ever have one full that we have to pull from your production network. After that, it's change data only. And then, like I said, we set how often, for how long, and where to. Rubrik looks to understand that maintaining your backups on an instant recovery platform can be very expensive. And we want to make sure that we keep just enough data. And you can see in this example, 31 days locally for instant recover local, and then manage your long-term data in your most cost-effective solution. And that's where that partnership of Rubrik and NetApp really can shine. And, again, so we manage that SLA that we set in the previous view out to that full 3 years in this example that was set. And now we're just managing that workload in the chosen archive location. And we can also replicate to another Rubrik appliance for true DR failover if you lost the entire primary site in that worst case scenario. And again, so in this example, we're keeping only 14 days replicated because we look to that window of whatever you as a customer see for recovery, but most of our customers generally don't recover full systems beyond 14 days or 30 days. At that point, it's file-based recovery. And since we index all of our workloads, no matter whether they're local, archived, or replicated, you only ever have to pull back just the file that you need. You don't have to instantiate anything to pull back more data. So looking in addition to that NetApp data fabric and how we complement it, for those workloads that you do have out there in the cloud, just understand that we can both archive to the cloud like we already spoke to. We have the cloud on capability, like I mentioned, where we convert vSphere and Hyper-V VMs to Azure and AWS for the varying concerns you might have there. We can protect workloads cloud natively, and right now that includes Office 365, Mail and OneDrive, soon SharePoint. We can protect Amazon AWS instance, or excuse me, Amazon EC2 instances and RDS instances, and we can protect Azure VHD instances as well. And that's without any required infrastructure in the cloud. That's with our Polaris SaaS platform. All you're doing is configuring an SLA domain like we talked about. And lastly, we can also do cloud-based edition protection for databases, SQL and Oracle, where we run a virtual version of the cloud platform we're talking about. And finally, we have that capability. And this, again, partnership shines here, whether we're ingesting NAS workloads or we're pushing those workloads to a core NetApp Fabric solution, where you keep just enough data on your Rubrik side for near instant recovery, and you have a cost-effective, very secure platform for your long-term retention needs beyond that. So there's kind of your high-level overview of Rubrik. Obviously, we would love to show that more in detail, carry this out from a demo perspective, which we'll see in a little bit. but I want to take the opportunity now to turn it back over to Jonathan, where he's going to speak a little bit more about some of the overlap between Rubrik and NetApp and the NetApp side of the house. And Jonathan, I'll stop the share here so you can pick it up and carry the slides on your end.
Sure. Thank you, Nathan.
Absolutely.
So we're going to go from here to nowhere here. So,
hey, you know, at least one of us had to show it off, but I'll take that on me. I didn't get enough of them sent out for those of you watching. The wigs, that is.
I'm jealous. Okay, so I mean, just to touch on the partnership between our two companies, to highlight this partnership is the Rubrik and NetApp StorageGRID specifically was the first certified system to use together. So that's one aspect of the partnership that you'll see throughout this presentation, and I'll touch on more about the engineering integration when we cover the SnapDiff section. But as I mentioned before, you know, I remember Rubrik coming out of stealth, you know, years ago. I remember, you know, selling Rubrik systems, and one of the first things that customers mentioned as an ask, as a want, was like, you know, I can achieve my backups and I can achieve my goals of, you know, instant recovery on even some of the smallest Rubrik systems. However, I have, you know, retention requirements, or my data density is extremely large, and I need to store this data for a long time. You know, if I needed to store this traditionally, as is highlighted on the slide deck here, is without archiving or direct archiving too, I would need to store this on a Rubrik cluster. And that could result in me having, you know, 8 bricks, 16 bricks, just to store data itself. So as Nathan mentioned, one of the first things Rubrik did was add the ability to archive data into an NFS, CIFS, or object storage solution. And that offered customers a lot of advantages of moving data that's older, that doesn't really offer that value of instant recovery, because I don't really need to restore data that's 30 days or older, but I need to retain it, right, for various reasons. So let me move this to more cost-effective storage while Rubrik is still maintaining the catalog, the index, the metadata around this data in case I do need to restore it. Then the next evolution of that was, okay, well, NAS, especially unstructured data, is extremely dense, right? This is application-generated binary data. This is user-generated binary data. You know, depending on your workloads, you can result in very large files, but a small amount of that, or very small files, but a lot of them, right? So how do I do this more effectively in terms of storing it? So what Rubrik came out with was this concept of direct archive. Instead of storing the data itself on the Rubrik cluster, let me move this to another location. I'm still going to maintain a catalog. I'm still going to maintain an index. I'm going to still maintain all the metadata. So every subsequent backup is still forever incremental, but let me store this on a more cost-effective solution. And within our two companies, that more cost-effective solution is StorageGRID. So you still get all the flexibility, all the advantages of Rubrik with a more cost-effective.
Jonathan, did we lose you?
I'm still here.
I think we may have lost Jonathan.
I think we did.
Give him a moment here.
Sure, he's coming back. Jonathan, it's just your voice.
I can always share the deck out too if we need.
Nathan, if you could sing some show tunes to keep everyone entertained in the interim.
Show tunes in a wig? Like,
yeah.
I gotta like channel Halen or here. So
You could maybe drop some share on us. I feel like that's I feel like with the wig.
No, Nobody wants to hear my falsetto. That would be an experience that the entire front range would shudder from.
Don't worry about screen captures. I got them already.
Ah, there we go. And I see Josh showing off the old Rubrik Metallica shirts. They were.
Oh, for sure. That's pretty sick. You're muted, Josh.
You're muted, Josh. If you're trying to make commentary here.
Nothing helpful. Just talking about my shirt. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, we decided the blonde wig would be a better look for me. You know.
The scary thing is Josh has actually been wearing that for about 36 hours. So
I'm sure.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's gonna meld to me like in Joe Dirt. You know that wig is stuck on him.
Josh, I just got a terrible screen capture of you. It's like when you pause a movie at the wrong time, and a very attractive celebrity doesn't look very good. This is I'm sticking with it though. So you'll
there you go.
Keep an eye on LinkedIn.
For those who don't know me, my name is Josh Sarkar. I am the local Rubrik account executive for the commercial territory in Colorado, based in Denver. And really, while we're waiting for the NetApp folks to rejoin, the theme of the integration for us is high performance and seamlessness, right? Now, we play well with everybody, but we have a special partnership with NetApp. You're going to see us at NetApp Insight as a diamond sponsor. In fact, I think that's this week here. We're continuing to co-develop with them. We have a strong relationship with them, and we get access to the APIs before anybody else. So it's a very powerful partnership. I think it's going to grow in the future because it's at the highest levels. So you're going to see more and more from NetApp plus Rubrik as an offering to bring a very coherent strategy to market. Oh, it looks like we got Jonathan back here. Jonathan, can you hear us? Yeah, you're on mute. Yeah. There we go.
Oh,
Yep,
no.
someone muted me.
Josh,
Okay.
Josh,
There we go.
I did another screen capture, and it's no better than the first, so I think it might be you.
Yeah, it's probably my face. Yeah, it's the problem I'm working on.
That's why I don't. That's why I don't do video. It's I don't have any good photos.
Voice for radio. We got it.
Exactly.
There you go. Yeah.
All right, Jonathan.
Well, I'm on my hotspot now, so wish me luck here. So where did I leave off? Because I was talking for a while and then it disconnected.
You just started to talk about like NASDA and StorageGRID. The third bit of the slide there.
Okay. So with NAS Direct Archive with Rubrik, right, this ability to store the data itself directly into StorageGRID, which is an object storage solution. I'll touch on it more, but store it directly there as a more cost-effective solution, a more available solution in terms of its geo-redundancy and so forth. But still have all the benefits of Rubrik CDM and the Rubrik solution, right? Because all the metadata, all the index, all the catalog is still retained within Rubrik. You still get the advantages of forever incremental. And we're just really the backup data target for Rubrik in this use case. And you can also start taking advantage of StorageGRID options to also make that solution a little bit more cost effective or more available depending on your requirements. And I'll touch on that more. So what is StorageGRID? As I mentioned, it is an object storage solution. It is it can be consumed a number of ways. I'll get into this more as we move along, but it can be consumed as an appliance that you buy directly from, NetApp or your partner. And it comes in various node types. What's great about the StorageGRID solution is it's not a one size fits all type of solution. You can mix and match node types and any other the consumption methods that I'll mention, right? So you can spin your own solution up on your own bare metal servers. Maybe you have a partnership with the various server manufacturers out there that's more cost effective, and you're like, let me spin it up on my own hardware, right? You can certainly do that. You can spin it up on a virtualized environment and run virtualized StorageGRID nodes, which could be StorageGRID nodes that are only compute to add performance capabilities within the StorageGRID environment, or to also add performance and storage itself. And you can also use it in the public cloud. You can mirror data into the public cloud. You can create it as its own site. It can be its tier into it. As I mentioned, it is a It is a geo-distributed environment. It is multi-site, geo-redundant with any object storage. The real concept around this is it's globally addressable. So it's just a matter of how do I steer traffic towards it? Is that DNS? Is that GTM? Is that an LTM? Doesn't really matter. It is policy driven. So just like Rubrik, while you may have options, under the covers, with a command line or RESTful API, the goal here is to make it simple, right? So you can drive everything through policies, namely around what we call ILM, Integrated Lifecycle Management policies, to determine how data is protected, where data lives, even on what nodes the data lives on, right? Which can affect performance. If you have an application that has certain performance characteristics, you can decide where that data lives. So in terms of how you put data on StorageGRID, we do support the S3 protocols. We try to stay lockstep with what AWS releases in terms of that protocol itself. You'll see that we'll be shortly supporting object lock capabilities. We do support Swift. To be candid, we don't see that a lot in the field. And we also do support NFS and CIFS access for limited use cases. This is the idea that I can't really change the application or user workflow on how data is stored. So I do need to use an NFS or CIFS protocol. So I'm going to use this to really use it as a vehicle to migrate data into an object storage solution. In terms of the history of StorageGRID, it isn't really new. It was first developed by a company called Bycast back in 2001. We acquired them in 2010, and ever since we've continued to develop it. I believe it was around 2014 where we renamed it into StorageGRID. And you'll kind of see that we have a regular cadence, 6 months to 8 months of major releases. We certainly have releases in between that time. Our next release is slated shortly, I believe in November. You'll see additional features and again, those updates to stay lockstep with S3 protocols, right? So it's a little slow on my end. I'm going to just build out this slide. As I mentioned, you can deploy this a number of ways. It's very flexible. You can mix and match, whether or not it's an appliance-based, VMware-based, bare metal-based. It'll still managed by one common management plane that's accessible from any node. And even within the appliance, like I mentioned, you can have different node types. Right? We make very dense nodes of spinning disks. We make medium-sized, more consumable nodes that have spinning disks. We also make all-flash nodes, right? So those use cases where you really do need very fast performance, not necessarily on ingest but read too. We do make flash nodes. So some of the use cases for object storage is probably the one use case I saw in the field early on was backup and archive. Right? I feel like object storage in that use case is very analogous to tape, right? It's data that doesn't necessarily need to be accessed all the time, but it's important, right? It needs to be stored, it needs to be durable. Ideally, it needs to be accessible, something you can't do with tape, but it needs to be cost effective, more importantly, right? Because I'm not necessarily accessing it all the time. I need to make sure that solution is cost effective, right? And also early on, object storage was a lot of solutions was in the public cloud and not necessarily on-prem. So it had the same kind of performance characteristics of tape in that sense, right? Because it is, offsite in the public cloud somewhere. It's not the fastest thing in the world, but I don't necessarily need it to be for traditional backup and archive, right? So as we moved into object storage, we found certainly new use cases. Other use cases, a lot of content hosting, static content where I just need to distribute this around the world, but it doesn't change a lot. Certainly unstructured data, media, big data analytics is probably a newer thing where, because it is a geo-distributed environment that's globally accessible, so you can access this data from anywhere, you can certainly create a big data environment, analytic environment where you have different nodes in different locations doing different things, right? And the other concept too is we do have customers, and I've certainly seen this prior to, where at some point there's an inflection where the cost of running in the public cloud becomes too much. They still want that advantage of object storage and the advantage of having it globally adjustable, having metadata that's customizable and not static like it is in an unstructured file format. But it's becoming too costly and too inflexible. So we do provide that ability to run this on-prem and to privatize, that feature set that you get from the AWSs and the Azures of the world, right? GCPs of the world too, right? Don't want to leave them out. And as I mentioned, let's build this a little bit out. This is geo-distributed. You can have StorageGRID sites, which are made up of nodes, in a number of locations. There's no real known upper limit of this. It's just really, how geo-distributed do you want this? Another advantage of this, right, is that we have a lot of customers that are global customers that have to abide by different regulatory compliance, right? So having an environment that's still one environment, that's still managed as one environment, but allows the flexibility to store data and where it needs to be, right? And the concept of data gravity. For example, like if you have a GPDR environment and there's some requirement to never leave the European region, you can certainly set, even at an object level, where that data lives and fence it into the European region, the European sites itself. So everything is policy driven. As I mentioned, what we term it as is ILM, the Integrated Lifecycle Management. It does define where data lives, right? So does it live on specific data centers, specific sites, specific nodes, specific media? How long the data is stored itself. So in the location or the tier, like I mentioned, you can tier this out into public clouds, hyperscalers. And how secure is this data? Is it immutable? Does it have more replicas, more copies of this data? Because I need this data is very important. I need to be super durable. I need to suffer not just node going down within the sites, but entire sites going down. You can define it at an object level if need be. In terms of how you consume StorageGRID, there are two concepts, like most companies, right? We do have the traditional perpetual license, right? You buy it, you buy the license for the storage, you buy the appliance for the storage, whatever it is, and you own it, right? For however long you want it, however long it's supported. And then the other methodology is subscription based. So you pay per terabyte of used data. So you do have to define kind of like your expected capacity growth, et cetera, but the license does expire at the end of the term. But it just provides you the advantage of that elasticity of purchasing as opposed to outlaying capital upfront. Let's put this out a little bit. Everyone's still with me, right? I didn't just disconnect and not know it.
Yes, sir.
With you.
You're solid.
So within our Ireland policy framework, as I mentioned, it's very dynamic. That's one thing I probably didn't miss, is a lot of solutions, you define a policy up front and it applies to the data. And when you make changes to those policies, it only applies to for new data. Within our solution, if you make a change in the policy, it does retroactively apply. So if you decide, this bucket, for example, of Rubrik data, I only need 2 copies of it, right? So it's going to live in San Diego and New York, for example. But something comes along, maybe a new requirement, maybe a new compliance officer, and says, well, you know what, I actually want 3 copies of this data. Maybe, if we don't have 3 copies, our insurance rates are going to go up for some reason. Well, you didn't know that, when you implemented a solution as an admin, right? Because it wasn't the requirement at the time. So how would you do that in a traditional way? I mean, you would have to really make another copy manually. With our solution, you just change the policy. Say, okay, well, now I want 3 copies. And it goes back and makes that 3rd copy. You can do the reverse. Maybe, you know, after, for example, data is 30 days or older, I don't need 2 copies. Maybe I just need 1 copy. You can set that policy, and you can set it, like I said, at any stage of the life cycle, and it will retroactively apply. So our policies, again, define, you know, the life cycle of the object itself, you know, where it lives, how durable it is, the location of it, and then anything else that you can think of, you can key in on any of the metadata. So as I mentioned, like the advantage of object data is the metadata is customizable. So the application can define metadata itself on the object. So within our policy framework, you can say if it's written a certain metadata tag on it, I can take action on this, right? Maybe it belongs to a certain data set. Maybe I defined it, what it is, the binary type of it. I can say, okay, if it matches it, I can do this, X, Y, Z to it. You know, I can have various copies. I can have it live in certain nodes. I can have it live in certain sites, etc. Don't make sure there's no questions. No, I think we're good. Okay, so in terms of further integration, is that, you know, StorageGRID is our ability for Rubrik to store data more effectively. So how about backups, right? Actually running the backup itself. You know, when you talk about structured data, like, you know, applications running on VMware or databases, this is what Rubrik does great, right? This is what they started with. This is what they know how to do. A lot of those applications and those technologies have their own framework in terms of data protection. One thing that traditionally doesn't has always been a pain point of administrators, and I can attest to that since I've run quite a few large unstructured data environments, is when we talk about file data, there's never been a great way to back up file data. You know, NDMP came along at some point, but that's never been a great methodology of backing up data. So backing up unstructured data, file data has always been rather slow. It either revolves around, like I said, integration with NDMP to hopefully accelerate that backup, or more importantly, most people, and Rubrik can do this too, is use a native protocol, right? Talk CIFS, NFS, walk a directory tree, do some type of comparison, you know, most likely metadata hash comparison of the file structure, a folder structure, and see what's changed. If something's changed, then read the data, right? So on very, you know, file count density environments, that could take hours. I mean, I've had healthcare customers where, you know, they don't necessarily have a high data change rate, you know, maybe 1-2%, if that, but they have millions, if not tens of millions of files. And to do a backup every day, you know, requires, you know, 10+ hours just to walk a directory structure to see what's changed, but not necessarily to take that change data. That's hours, if not minutes sometimes, because nothing has really changed sometimes, right? So NetApp has had this API for a while. It's called SnapDiff, right? It's you know, the concept is, you know, between traditional snapshots, I'm sure everyone's aware, you can, it's rather easy to say, okay, between 2 snapshots, I can determine what blocks have changed. And again, for structured data, that's great. For unstructured data, what we need is, well, we need that kind of same concept to say what has changed, what's the delta between these 2 points in time, but I need to get a file list. I need an easy way to say, oh, these are all the files that have changed. And that's what this API does. I mean, from an ONTAP NetApp perspective, we've always been tracking what's changed. So why not allow partners like Rubrik to leverage that ability and to use it to accelerate their workflows and their backups. So once you, so how does SnapDiff work, right? It's, well, okay, I'm gonna request a baseline, a snapshot, the first point in time, for example. You know, and now we have this, you know, directory structure, and this is the file layout. Now I know what it is. I'm gonna go in, back up all this data in the baseline. And that's my first backup. And since Rubrik is a forever incremental, the concept is, okay, the next backup, I'm just going to now take what's changed. So like I said, traditionally, this would be walking the directory tree and seeing, for this example, oh, well, a file's been added into directory 2. However, with our SnapDiff APIs, all it does is make an API call, say, hey, NetApp ONTAP, what's changed? And we say this, file 04, Rubrik goes and reads that file, and that's the next backup. So in terms of the life cycle of a backup job when you're leveraging SnapDiff, so you take a snapshot within our environment. If no baseline has existed, you're going to take, that's going to be your new baseline in the Rubrik solution. Now it's going to read all the data, store it, and that's going to be its first backup, right? Rubrik's going to read all the metadata, index the files, get all the magic that Rubrik does, make it easy for you to find a file if it ever changes or needs a restoration. Grab the ACLs and then put it in its data format. Do any erasure coding, data reduction, etc., and then store that data. On every subsequent backup, it's just going to take a new snapshot or request a new snapshot and do a SnapDiff comparison. And like I said, all this requires is for ONTAP to say, hey, here's a list of files. So you can, see an environment, like I mentioned, like this healthcare environment going from 10 plus hours to, less than an hour sometimes, because it's just, now I just need to say, I'm just going to read the changed data now. I'm just going to read the changed files. I don't need to walk a directory structure and compare all the changes and to walk a directory structure to ensure there is no changes within this file structure. Another advantage while leveraging our SnapDiff API and the advantage of Rubrik CDM, because it's a forever incremental technology, is we released something on our ONTAP solutions recently called Fabric Bowl. This was the idea that, hey, maybe I'm running an all-flash system and I either take snapshots on that all-flash system, or I have data that's cold as it tends to be. It's not accessed by users or applications very often, but I'm still paying for that very expensive flash storage because I need to store it somewhere. So we came out with a concept of Fabric Pool tiering technology, really, to say, hey, let's move this from expensive flash storage into a capacity tier like object storage, like StorageGRID. So it's in a more cost-effective solution, but it's still available, right? It's always available. It's durable. It's secure. We know if a user reads that file that's cold, maybe it hasn't been touched for 6 months, but if a user goes and reads that file, we're not changing how that user reads it. We haven't changed its access patterns. It's all transparent to the user. So the user clicks on that 6-month-old file. In the background, it retrieves it from that highly available object storage solutions and puts it back into the performance tier, and it's available to the customer. But that presents a problem for backup solutions, especially traditional backup solutions that just walk a directory structure or takes scheduled full backups, which you often did with like an NDMP solution or again a native protocol solution. You would have to take scheduled backups to ensure that the data that you've backed up is consistent, right? So if you go and read and do a full backup, what you're essentially doing is I now have to retrieve all this data from the capacity tier. So that can be very expensive if that capacity tier is a public cloud. If you decided to store that in AWS or Azure, not only is it kind of slow when you have to go through the internet or go through your direct connect or whatever to retrieve that data, you also have to pay that egress charge of retrieving that data. But with Rubrik CDM, especially because it is a forever incremental technology and it does use SnapDiff and the integrations within our two companies, it never needs to read that data that's stored in the capacity tier after its first backup. So as I mentioned, I anecdotally mentioned about a healthcare customer that, that had, problems that a lot of our customers have, especially running ONTAP systems where they have very dense environments. So I did want to highlight an actual use case that we had. We had a customer that had, 500 million files, a conservative 1.5% daily change rate. So roughly, 7.5 million files added, deleted, updated, changed, whatever, every single day. So without using Rubrik, without using SnapDiff, they had to scan 500 million files to find 7.5 million files that were updated. That took 7 to 14 hours, right? Now they put in Rubrik. Now we can leverage SnapDiff. That same backup took 15 minutes because again, all I need to do is say, hey, what has changed? Here you go. Let's read this data, and that's what Rubrik does really well too. And because it's a scale out technology, it's extremely fast. It can distribute its tasks among its nodes, has multiple network interfaces. It can read that data. Even if that data is large, right? So that was a 10x reduction using, or 10x reduction in load using SnapDiff APIs, right? Because it's not a backup solution, walking entire directory structure, requesting all the metadata, etc., taking up CPU cycles within our ONTAP environment, and reduced the backup time by 92%. Now with that, we're going to move on to the demo. So I'm going to turn that over to Zach.
Hey, Jonathan, just a real quick note on that last slide.
Sure.
We have had a couple customers too, as you'll kind of see through the demo, and I talk about the differences between NDMP and basically our just native NAS backup protection.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was this customer, but we've also seen customers reduce, just moving to Rubrik without SnapDiff, reduce their backup time
Absolutely.
like 34 hours to 7 to 14 hours. And then, then you exponentially make that better with the SnapDiff integration itself. So again, both products have a solution to help increase those speeds.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, it's just inherent to your technology being scaled out, right? It just offers a lot of horsepower. So even if you can't leverage SnapDiff, maybe you're not using a NetApp system. Why you're not, I don't know, but maybe you're not, and you have to use a native protocol. It's still going to be accelerated when you use a Rubrik.
I don't see many customers that actually do, not use SnapDiff, but I'm just saying, we've improved, 3x speeds on just the NAS backup, and when you pair that together with SnapDiff, some pretty crazy results. So with that, I'm going to jump into the demo. So this is the Rubrik UI, and this is ONTAP. So we'll come into ONTAP with the dashboard. We'll come into volumes. And this is going to be the volume we're going to protect today, this EMDD test. And we'll go to snapshots. And then we're going to sort by the snapshot name. We'll come up and find Rubrik. And filter by Rubrik. It's not going to let me filter by Rubrik. There we go. So I filtered by Rubrik. You can see it's 9:14 a.m. right, and we've got it's 9:51 a.m. and we have a snapshot from 9:14 a.m. here. You can see it's tagged as we call the snapshots in NetApp to dictate that this is being used by Rubrik, so that your storage admins don't clean up these snapshots by accident. And then we come back to the Rubrik UI, and we go to servers and apps, and we go to our NAS shares. And again, in Rubrik, we thought it would be good to have Google-like search for everything. So we can search for the name of that share in particular. I'll click on that share, and then I'll take an on-demand snapshot. I'll select my file set, which tells us what files on that share I want to back up. In this particular case, it's everything. I'll click next. I can select what retention I want. I'm going to retain this one forever. I'm going to click next, then I'm going to click on demand. And down below, you'll see it kick off in just a second. It's going to call a NetApp snapshot. And we'll give that just a second. And now you can see it's calling off a NetApp snapshot. So if I come back to the FAS and do a refresh, you now see I have 2 snapshots with a Rubrik snapshot name called by NetApp. And from there, NetApp will basically go through the SnapDiff process, tell Rubrik which files have changed, and Rubrik will go back and process those files. Now, as Jonathan mentioned, we don't use NDMP. We use the native SMB and NFS libraries to do scans. The benefits of that is NDMP is single-threaded, so you don't get any parallelism. It doesn't really scale well. The more files or the larger the files you have, the worse NDMP gets. And the only way to fix that is to break up your backup jobs into multiple jobs. So you might take one NAS share and break that up into 20, 30, 40, 50 jobs, just so you can get parallelism. With Rubrik, we automatically do that. So what we do is we actually map out all the data and then assign basically streams to chunks of data so that you can take advantage of a huge amount of parallelism across your shares, no matter how they're set up. So obviously, if you get that one dense file share, it gets hard to break up with NDMP. With Rubrik, we're just kind of automating that whole process. We don't care, about directories or anything while we do that process. And as you can see, the snapshot is completing now, and then it'll wrap up. And what you'll see is Rubrik clean up the snapshot. Oh, it's actually in the retrieval stage, sorry. So with that parallelism, and because we're in the native libraries, we also are able to maintain an incremental forever approach like Nathan talked about. The benefit of that is with NDMP, they recommend best practice is to run an intermittent full. So maybe once a month, once a week, you should run another NDMP full backup, which means pulling all your data back across the wire and then restoring it on some type of secondary storage or tape for long-term retention, things of that nature. With Rubrik, we'll never have to redo that process at any point in time in the life cycle of the NAS backup. So again, really unique. I have customers that their fulls with NDMP, they have to do once a month, and they can take up to 3 days to complete, or even more. So this is a really great solution to be able to avoid those kind of monthly nuisances. And it looks like we've now completed. And if I come back into NetApp, click refresh, you can see it cleaned up the old snapshot and it's got the new one from 950. And it'll keep that behind for the next time Rubrik runs a backup. Now, once you've got all this data backed up, Rubrik is also again, with our search capabilities, I can type in any number of different search criteria. You can see here, it doesn't have to be an exact file name, and it'll pull up every version, every file that matches my search string. And I can pick one, and you'll see it also shows me every version and timestamp of every version of that particular file. So in this case, we've backed this file up 11 different times on 11 different days. A lot of them are the same day, but you can see I can go ahead and find just the different versions really easily. Another really cool integration we have specifically with ServiceNow, but again, this is something you could do with whatever kind of offering you have. You could build a web browser yourself to do it, but because Rubrik has the metadata, we're also capable of just showing you the times the file changed. So let's say I have 11 backups of this one file, but the file only changed twice. I could filter out the 2 times the files were different, and then I could provide my end user with every version that's ever existed of that file that had also been backed up. So it gives us a lot of different options to do with that. And that's pretty much the demo. If anybody has, do we have any Q&A questions?
Not seeing any in chat. Definitely throw in there or speak up if you do. But Zach, to your point, I hope you guys saw in the demo, the goal here is, always from a Rubrik perspective, is to wrap it back in from a simplicity's sake. Simpler for your management, simpler on the production impact to the environment for those backups, always reducing that time, whether it's in to take backup or your time to engage. Want to be good to you that way.
Exactly.
Matt, I guess if there's no Q&A, any closing thoughts you want to wrap up with, or
Matt, we can't hear you if you're on mute. Well, if Matt may be having some audio issues here. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap things up. I really appreciate everyone who joined, and of course our partners at NetApp and One Technology. Please let us know if you need anything. I'm probably a great potential point of contact. Matt is. we'd be happy to do a demo for your team, or we even have availability in some lab environments depending on what you're trying to do. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thanks to our hosts and partners for making this happen. And I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you all. See ya.
Thanks, everyone.